This is episode 78 of That Shakespeare Life. This episode is brought to you in part by Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation App, the only audio Shakespeare pronunciation app which is designed to remove fears about how to speak Shakespeare's language so that his plays are accessible to everyone. Find out more about this app in today's show notes and stay tuned after the episode for how you can learn more.
Hi, I'm David Bevington, American literary scholar and award-winning Shakespeare editor, author, and professor. Another great method for studying William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend, Cassidy Cash.
The first parade floats you're talking about would have been these very highly decorated barges on the Thames, and these waterborne pageants on the river and the beginning procession of the day on water were very sort of significant and spectacular as part of the overall festivities of the day.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
A tradition from Shakespeare's lifetime that continues into the present day is that of the Lord Mayor's shows. It's an annual occurrence which exists to introduce the Lord Mayor to the people, the monarch, and London in particular. The way this occasion is marked today, though, is far and away removed from the wild and festive nature of the event when William Shakespeare and his contemporaries were celebrating it in the early 17th century. The event is so influential on history and society, and indeed the world, that many of our modern conventions and even terminology connected with events like parades and civic pageants come from the words and celebratory practices that occurred at the Lord Mayor's shows. Here to walk us through the history of this event and help us get to know what this would be like for William Shakespeare is our guest, Samuel Jermy. Samuel is a PhD candidate at the University of Leeds in the School of English, supervised by Dr. Jane Rickard. Having previously gained a master's in Renaissance literature from the University of Exeter, he is currently working on his thesis titled Thomas Middleton, Masculinities and Embodiment, funded by a scholarship from the Arts and Humanities Research Council of the United Kingdom. His research interest in various aspects of early modern literature include the relationship between works for the early modern stage and civic pageantry, like the Lord Mayor's shows. Representations of early modern cityscapes are included in his research, as are the histories of the gendered body. Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the show.
Hi, happy to be here. Hi.
Why were the Lord Mayor's shows performed at all?
Well, the annual Lord Mayor's shows had become important events in the City of London's calendar over the 16th and 17th centuries. This had happened every year on the 29th of October, following the feast of St. Simon and St. Jude, where the city celebrated the election of the Lord Mayor when he took his oath of office at Westminster in a hugely popular and extravagant procession across the city. The mayor would come from the rank of alderman of one of the 12 livery companies of London, some of which include the grocers, drapers, fishmongers, skinners, and merchant tailors. And this annual ritual originated out of King John's Charter of 1215, which granted the city the right to elect the mayor of the City of London, as long as the newly elected mayor would leave the City of London to the town of Westminster and swear loyalty to the crown. This annual procession was designed to show the new mayor to the sovereign at court while being sworn in, as well as showing the new mayor to the people under his jurisdiction in the City of London. So while the early modern Lord Mayor's shows has a very long history behind it, only during the 16th century does the inaugural day begin to include the kinds of pageantry and shows that we think of it today. So the Lord Mayor's shows were performed in part as a way to negotiate the relationship between the monarch, the mayor, and the citizens of the City of London across the streets. The increasing prominence of the spectacular procession within the city is matched by the increasing wealth, political power, and prominence of the merchants of these guilds who organize city life. And through the annual performance of the Lord Mayor's show, the men who ran the city were able to create this mythology of civic mercantilism that emphasizes like service, good works, and prosperity, And this is sort of evident in the show's interest in creating its own history, which is seen in the staging repeated mayors of the past, such as Henry Fitz-Aylwin, the first mayor of the City of London, or even characters like Dick Whittington. And through these elaborate costumes, props, and the deeply sort of allegorical pageants that these Lord Mayor's shows present, they were able to define to both the incoming mayor and to the watching spectators what the virtues of the magistrate should be.
Now, you mentioned pageantry and then even allegorical tales here, and we are using the word show to describe this event that happened during Shakespeare's lifetime. But was this like a theater production in terms of, was it trying to tell a story, or was this more like a parade?
Well, the Lord Mayor's shows differ quite a lot from storytelling that we expect from the theatre and the Shakespearean stage. Because firstly, this kind of pageantry has the City of London itself as the stage. It's like a parade in the streets. So these shows had pageant devices staged along the procession route throughout the day, which broke up a series of narrative-like scenes across a variety of locations and times as the mayor progressed throughout the day. In fact, the shows rarely had what we might think of a narrative at all. Instead, they are more like a series of loosely linked, emblematic kind of performances.
So they followed a theme, and they were designed to demonstrate something for the Lord Mayor as part of that year's theme, but they weren't necessarily small theater performances.
No, not really. There would be pageant devices, which would typically be placed on mobile wagons. So they would follow the mayor's procession throughout the day as they'd be performed, but it would be broken up throughout the day. So it was very, very different from a theatre story, which would be very contained.
Were all of the performances specifically for the Lord Mayor and his entourage, or was this the kind of thing where citizens of London would have traveled the parade route to see these performances as well?
They would have tried to follow the pageantry throughout the streets, but because of just how popular these were, like, it would be very difficult for any one citizen to have seen the entire show. Because if you can't make your way to see the show, you sort of have to rely on these very highly visual pageant devices that I've mentioned. And so really the mayor is the only person throughout the day who would see the entirety of the show at all. Everyone else would see bits and pieces. They might be able to get a sense of what's happening, but the mayor is the only one who gets, if you would call it a narrative, he's the one who sees the narrative.
Would Shakespeare have been influenced by this event? Are there places in his plays that we can see he included elements of this?
I think we can see an influence here, because while Shakespeare never wrote any pageantry for the city, unlike a large number of his contemporaries such as Thomas Dekker, Thomas Middleton, or John Webster, the kind of pageantry used in the Lord Mayor's shows offered to Shakespeare this visual language of spectacle that could be transferred onto the stage, such as the popularity and conventions of the shows provided a range of stock characters of popular history and mythology, sort of themes, of the emotional tones. And it also provided a dramatic visual language to express these through characters, props, and places within the theatre. So, for example, in Richard II, there's a conversation between the gardener and his assistant, which is sort of a pageant scene in itself in language, which is inserted into the play that metaphorizes the political conflicts through the image of the garden, where they discuss how to root away the noisome weeds, which without profit suck the soil's fertility from wholesome flowers. And the garden, for example, was a popular pageant device in Lord Mayor's shows as well, such as Thomas Dekker's 1628 show, where the mayor is addressed as your sovereign's gardener for 1 year and the city is the plot of ground. Now, I'm not suggesting these would be direct quotes or direct references, but they do share the very common visual language of spectacle and metaphor. And other examples which we can see this kind of allegory and deeply visual spectacle happening are in plays such as in Cymbeline with the descent of Jupiter. We have Pericles' vision of Diana, the magical restoration of Hermione surrounded by music in The Winter's Tale, or Catherine's vision of the white-robed figures adorned in garlands and visits in Henry VIII. So while Shakespeare didn't really represent London directly in his plays, we do see an interest in and representation of the kinds of visual and oral sort of display that are very typical of the London Lord Mayor's shows in these plays repeatedly coming up.
elements of this show would precede what we think of as modern day parade elements, like a float specifically. Samuel, do we use the word float to talk about the movable displays in a street parade today because the Lord Mayor would have traveled around the city on a barge in the River Thames?
I think this is such a good question. And it's something that I'm personally find very interesting about the Lord Mayor's shows, because you're right that the first parade floats you're talking about would have been these very highly decorated barges on the Thames, and these waterborne pageants on the river and the beginning procession of the day on water were very sort of significant and spectacular as part of the overall festivities of the day. And the Thames itself would not only have the mayor on this very lavish barge traveling across the river to Westminster, the river would be filled with hundreds of highly decorated watercraft, as well as spectators who'd be floating in their own boats, along with like banners, streamers, musicians, fireworks, and cannons. And these would be these amazingly spectacular parts of the river. And in a lot of written accounts, we see this is what people remember the most, and this is the most important part of the day for them because it's boisterous and it's exciting. And what's, I think, very interesting as well, these devices on the water would be amphibious. So with the use of trolleys, the devices such as like islands or marine deities or exotic trading places, they could be built onto the boats, but then loaded onto the cart and then follow them out onto the land. So I think that's sort of very what we think of a parade, like floating from the river and then floating on almost on the land as well to follow the mayor.
One year, I believe it's 1616, and you can correct me because I'm not sure, but I think it was 1616 when a lemon tree was actually used in the parade. And we know that at least sometimes the Lord Mayor himself would dress up in costume, since Sir William, I'm going to pronounce his name as Cockaigne.
I try cocaine, but
cocaine. All right, we'll do that. And we'll spell this in the show notes for those of us that aren't sure how to pronounce it. But he dressed up as a rooster in full and complete costume when he was the Lord Mayor, actually during Shakespeare's lifetime. At least one of these shows, he dressed up in this elaborate costume. Was it normal for the Lord Mayor to dress up this way?
I think more conventionally, the Lord Mayor and his aldermen would dress in traditional robes, the same ones they carry out their ceremonial duties. Such as we have descriptions of the robes being very deep red, crimson, scarlet, which admittedly are quite rooster-like, but the sort of visual punning by dressing up as a chicken you've mentioned with William Cockaigne is sort of another convention of Lord Mayor's shows. I mean, frankly, not nearly enough of them went as far to dress up, but the shows do include a lot of crude visual punning on a newly elected mayor's name within the show. And this is one way in which the pageantry was able to appear very current and speak to its audience. And these sort of puns created like a handy visual metaphor to associate the mayor's name with the popular imagination. So William Cockaigne was associated with the cockerel, which was also his family crest. And in Thomas Middleton's text for the 1619 show, he says that he calls the cock the yon bird of state, the vigilant cock at whose shrill crow the very lion trembles. And you also talked about the lemon tree in 1616 was used for the elected mayor, John Leman, to symbolize restoration and comfort that he's bringing to the city. And there's so many other famous examples of this, such as William Harp, like John Wells. And while these type of puns can seem quite on the nose or a bit odd, these sort of visual emblems of associating the mayor with something visual was sort of used to help keep the image in the public's mind is sort of in a very simple way and very striking, while still trying to make them seem quite virtuous and upright for the position of the Lord Mayor.
Not unlike some of the modern political campaigns you'll see for figures today, I would think.
Yes, well, here in the UK, one of our politicians is being called a chicken at the moment, so I can't help thinking of that when you say that.
Not going to touch that one at all.
No.
What was the general route of the parade? Now, give us a sense of what this would have looked like moving around the city, because we say that the Lord Mayor is going around the city of London, but did he stay in London proper the entire time? And how much of it was on land versus on the river? Give us a sense of where he would have gone during the day.
the mayor began his day by travelling from Guildhall southwards towards the Thames. And this would be where he'd be accompanied by lots of trumpeters and musicians. And then he would travel across the river outside of the City of London on the river to Westminster to swear his oath of mayoralty. And this initial crossing of the boundaries of the City of London sort of is an attempt to sort of map and perform the relationship between the City of London and the Crown, which sort of holds its offices in Westminster. And so then after this, they will return across the Thames back into the City of London. And this water procession is almost as long as the whole rest of the day on land, just for the amount of distance they really go on the water. And then the land procession begins properly as the mayor returns by Riverside, Hall Stairs or Baynard's Castle, and they, depending on the tides. And then they move northwards towards St. Paul's Churchyard. And then this is where the land procession begins, where the crowd get sort of moved aside by performers dressed as like devils, wild men, beadles, and they throw sweetmeats and goods into the crowd. And it's sort of keeps this very festive and boisterous atmosphere. And then after they've reached St. Paul's Churchyard, their procession moves towards the commercial district of Cheapside. And this is where a lot of the day's climactic pageants occur, usually at the public landmarks important to the communities in this route, such as the Cross, the Little Conduit, and the Standard. Then after that, the parade returns to Guildhall for the evening's feast. And then they go to St. Paul's again for the yearly prayers and ceremonial rites in the evening. And finally, the show's final procession heads towards the entrance of the mayor's house as the final destination of the day, which would be very sort of elaborately decorated for him to return to.
How long did the parade last? And was there a celebration afterwards, or when he reached the final house, was it everything wrap up just as soon as he got there?
Well, these celebrations really lasted all day and well into the evening as well. The preparations for the day usually began quite early in order to try and get everyone and everything ready and know where they should be going. So these preparations could begin as early as sort of 6 a.m. in order to assemble the company aldermen together as they would attend the mayor as he goes towards the Thames for the opening water show. So then these shows would then last the entirety of the day and often late into the evening. So by the final sermon at St. Paul's, there's an autumnal darkness that falls across the festivities as this occurs in late October. This often means that the final procession towards the mayor's house will be done under torchlight, a fact that is sometimes incorporated into the final pageants, or when they reach the mayor's house, there's usually this final sort of speech of exaltation or final pageant that's done in torchlight. So, for example, my favourite is Thomas Middleton's 1613, The Triumphs of Truth, which ends with a figure of truth setting fire to a figure playing Error's chariot, who sort of disappears in this big blaze, which sounds just spectacular if it's done in this sort of very like murky grey autumnal atmosphere.
Absolutely. It would be comparable to, a big fireworks display at the end of something. To me, this sounds a lot like what we do here in the States we have a big New Year's Day parade or a Thanksgiving Day parade that happens like that, where it lasts this big long time and there's lots of preparation before. It sounds like this is very similar to something like that. But what was the purpose and reputation of this office of the Lord Mayor? What did the Lord Mayor do?
Well, the Lord Mayor and his court of aldermen effectively ran the everyday business of the City of London as the Executive Council. So they would, they'd do their everyday sort of administration, the ambassadorial visits. They'd be in charge of even things like care of orphans. It was really sort of running the City of London. But at the same time, they faced pressure from the Crown, the Privy Council, and the court from above to try and limit the influence of these powerful merchants. And then from below, you have the subordinate organization of the City of London in its 26 wards, which all had very sort of strong control almost. So the Lord Mayor had sort of an odd position and very complex position in terms of his purpose. But I think with the reputation, it's also very mixed. So, for example, you mentioned William Cockayne before. And he was a very sort of notorious merchant courier who almost single-handedly caused an economic depression in England. But then he was eventually knighted by James because of his ability to flatter James' ego by feasting him and giving him gifts. And his sort of very, I think, a politely mixed reputation is almost sort of typical of what's expected of the individual to be elected to the mayor, because there's also rumours of them dipping into the treasury, using the regulatory powers given to them for their personal advantage. And in many ways, we see this reflected in the Lord Mayor's shows themselves, with the amounts of, didactic, moralizing speeches, the allegorical scenes. They really focus on what the virtues of mayoralty should be. So we can see this suspicion towards the men moving into these roles, because why are they being told to be so good if they're not behaving, if they should be behaving this way? Why are they being told this? And I think that's just quite interesting to sort of see the Lord Mayors having a very mixed reputation.
Now, I know that the Lord Mayor would have invited privileged groups to participate in the parade. Do we know if Shakespeare's company, after it had been, patronized by King James and giving the high reputation that he held as the king's men, would they have ever been invited to participate here? I know you said Shakespeare didn't write pageants for this, so I'm expecting the answer here to be no, but maybe if not Shakespeare, would any of the playing companies have been invited?
I think that they would be. We don't have any evidence Shakespeare was writing for them or even participated, but we do have sort of accounts of various members of the King's Men who had a variety of roles putting on these shows, such as we know that John Hemmings, Richard Burbage, John Rice, John Lowen, they've all been involved in a Lord Mayor's show in some capacity. So this is John Hemmings, who was an eventual co-editor of the 1623 Folio, for example, helped Thomas Dekker to write and prepare the show of 1612. And having largely given up acting at this point to focus more on managerial roles, it sort of suited him. So we see that in the Merchant Taylor's records, they list Dekker and Hemmings as jointly responsible for the creation and execution of the pageant devices. And Hemmings' role in the King's Men, then it translates to him arranging the places, timings, dates, rehearsals, and transports for the preparations of and performance of the big day, or even taking John Lowen, who was also a member of the Goldsmiths. We know he acted the role of Leofstein in Anthony Munday's 1611 show, and he was sort of almost so willing to perform and happy to perform that he provided his own horse for the performance and the day itself, which I think is just a really nice little fact. There are sort of sporadic references to actual players being invited to perform as actors, and more regularly they would use child performance for the songs and speeches, especially if they were on the big pageant devices having to sit on these very elaborate structures. I think they'd rather use a lighter child, but the prestigious players would sometimes be invited to perform with them. And when this was done, it was usually for quite significant roles or speeches in important pageants in the Lord Mayor's shows.
Do you think Shakespeare would have gone maybe to see his friends' performances? That's totally a conjecture-based question, let's be clear. But what do you think about that idea?
Well, I might have a conjecture-based answer, but I think considering how large and important the Lord Mayor's shows were, and these were happening annually, and we have records of seas of people from all kinds of classes, and not just from London, but from elsewhere coming in to come and watch these. Shakespeare must have come into contact with them, either through the performance or the printed. It's a bit later, but we also have the printed texts for the Lord Mayor's shows happening as well. So we know that he must have had some contact with him, because these shows were enormous. They had crowds across the streets and the riverbanks to watch the elected mayor come out, and it's almost hard to visualize just how significant that the Lord Mayor's shows were during Shakespeare's lifetime to the City of London's cultural calendar. So, because even today the Lord Mayor's shows still happen, but they don't enjoy the kind of popularity that they do in Renaissance England.
I know we would love to explore this further and to really dive into the history of the Lord Mayor's shows. What are some of your favorite books or resources that you might recommend for us to learn more?
I would say that Tracy Hill's Pageantry and Power, A Cultural History of the Early Modern Lord Mayor's Show, 1585 to 1639, is one of the best books out there on this. It's very meticulously researched and so wonderful scholarship. And it has so many interesting anecdotes and stories taken from the printed texts of these shows, accounts of their performance, and the records of the companies who sponsors them. And the book explores in really great detail into how these shows were actually performed and the context that they're being performed in. It's just really fantastic. And then there's also a collection of essays called Lord Mayor's Shows, 800 Years, 1215 to 2015. And it's very accessible and comprehensive history of the Lord Mayor's Show. And it's also very wonderfully illustrated. And I always think with these Lord Mayor's shows, you want to see them. You don't want to just read about them. So
with all of the decorations and the lavish sort of things that you've mentioned, yes, the illustrations are excellent. Definitely. So that's a wonderful resource.
Finally, I would definitely recommend checking out the Map of Early Modern London website. And this is a digital version of the Argus map, and it tries to recreate the spaces of early modern London. So it's very interactive. You can see, for example, you can look at Guildhall, and if you see where this is on the map, and it has links to all documents and texts that we have that mention it. And you can sort of map out the show's route for yourself onto the site and see the significance that the spaces would have. And they also have a lot of annotated editions of Lord Mayor's shows that have survived, as well as a comprehensive bibliography of what you can read more to find out about the spaces of London, which are very important to Lord Mayor's shows, as well as essays about the city space itself, such as one about the sounds of pageantry, which I think is very interesting as well, because not only do you want to see them, you want to try and hear them. And I think the essay they have on there on the sounds of pageantry is the closest we can get at the moment.
That's fascinating. I will ask you for the link after we wrap up the interview and make sure to place the link to that and the other two collections of essays and the book that you recommended, all in the show notes for today's episode. Thank you very much. Now, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I am supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Oh, this is a hard question. I think I would have to say the collected works of Thomas Middleton. Not only because I think I get to get some good Lord Mayor's shows with me, but I also get some of my favourite plays, such as A Chaste Maid in Cheapside or Macbeth's in there, or The Roaring Girl. You know, with that and the complete works of Shakespeare, I'm going to be on that island for a very long time.
And quite happily so, too. What is next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Well, I'm currently very focused on the next chapter of my PhD thesis, which I now have the time to write quite a lot. So I'm going to take advantage of that. And this part of my research is going to be thinking about the ideas of Middleton's collaborations, thinking about how this informs his thinking about masculinities. And I also get to work with my favorite Middleton play, The Changeling. So I'm very excited.
What a wonderful time. Well, we wish you all the best on completing your PhD and look forward to reading it when you wrap it up, because it sounds very fascinating. Thank you so much for being here this week and for introducing us to the Lord Mayor's shows.
No, thank you for having me. It's been great.
To add your voice to this conversation and to share with us your thoughts about the Lord Mayor's show, as well as to see links to the wonderful illustrations and the resources that Samuel mentions today, be sure to check out this episode's show notes. Not only will you find a place to leave your comments, but there's extra history there, as well as links to these resources and more for when you want to explore deeper into the history of today's topic. Find all these things and more over at cassidycash.com/episode 78. That's cassidycash.com/EP78. When I first started studying Shakespeare, especially as an American, where the English language is very different on this side of the pond than where Shakespeare was writing, I often mispronounced some of the words that you find in the plays. Like originally I said Gloucester instead of Gloucester. Well, that's why I downloaded Audio Shakespeare Pronunciation app. It's an easy-to-use, straightforward app that you can download to your phone or tablet on iTunes as well as Google Play. and it lets you search any word from Shakespeare, and then it tells you exactly how to say it with a playable audio guide built right in. Audio Shakespeare pronunciation app is like having a professional voice coach that you can carry in your pocket. Explore all the features of this app and download it right now at castycash.com/Shakespeare app. That's castycash.com/Shakespeare app. That's it for this week. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.